here for selfish purposes. Maybe these abductions, even though they're done in a objective but biological way, like we dissect frogs, maybe they're doing it just for fun and for sport. I mean, I don't know. I think probably that that the fear could be justified in some senses. Anne Druffel has written this book about how to prevent being abducted. And we really think, even if benevolent species coming to this planet and taking a man and a woman and taking ova out of a woman and sperm out of a man, that's tremendously invasive and very traumatic for the human beings. So even if the motives are good, these actions are as violent as anyone we're capable of on the planet. I think that a certain amount of fear is justified. If you look at Day the Earth Stood Still, the first thing that happens is the army is assembled and guns are shot at these beings and at the ship.
I addressed the question to Dick Cheney because I say the most important question to put to any high-ranking official is not what you think about UFOs or have you seen one. The most important question is, have you ever been briefed on the subject? Did someone walk in your office and tell you what's going on? Because if someone walks into the president's office or some high-ranking official and briefs him on the subject of UFOs, it is for real. It's not imaginary, as the government has been saying for 60 years. So I asked Mr. Cheney, this is 3 months after he became vice president, I asked him on the air, and this is still on Diane Ream's archives, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And if so, when was it and what were you told? And Mr. Cheney said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it probably would have been classified and I wouldn't be talking about it.
January 22nd, 1997, I noticed 3 amber orbs now at a distance far west on the horizon. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, even though they're in a line formation, they were amber, they were in a formation, they were hovering for minutes. And as I'm pointing like this, they reappear in the same spot. And I thought, I have to get a picture of this. And I ran upstairs, I grabbed my 35mm, get out onto the balcony. As I'm ready to shoot the 3 bottom orbs, suddenly 6 amber orbs in a row, totally equidistant from each other, massive span across, pop up.
On March 13, 1997, over 10,000 Arizona residents witnessed the single most spectacular UFO sighting in the 20th century. Headlines surged the nation, and Arizona residents demanded answers from military and state officials. A mile-wide UFO was seen from as far north as Flagstaff, Arizona, and then the giant triangular UFO hovered above the great city of Phoenix, Arizona, where Dr. Lynn Ketai shot this amazing videotape. When we go out into space and we're exploring the cosmos out there and we're looking for signs of extraterrestrial life, what kind of a communication are we going to send out? I mean, if Dan Aykroyd was the ambassador, if you were the ambassador for Earth, what message would you teletype to ET?
If I were to speak for mankind to these beings that were coming here, I guess what I would say is, let's go to some neutral place. Let's have a meeting with scientists from all around the world leaders. Let's sit down and basically have a sort of a forum with you, the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. Let's sit down and kind of get to know each other. And human instinct is pretty good, and I think it would almost like be a sort of a G8 style kind of summit with world leaders, scientific leaders, and these beings, and you'd sit down with them, and after about a week or even a couple of days or maybe a few hours, you would really sort of get a sense of what they're up to. But of course, childhood's end, Arthur C. Clarke's great story. It looked like these beings were benevolent, even though they had a malevolent appearance, and in the end we find out that they meant no good for our planet. So I You know, I mean, I think it's important that some branches of the military and police be briefed on these in a very real sense, and be told, you know, they are real, people are being abducted, there is mind control in play here, and that we do have to be vigilant. Now, if we knew that there was a purely benevolent race, like if something happened in Iraq where all of the electronics went out in the American military and all of the insurgents' rifles jammed, or we saw all of the polluted waters in North Carolina from the pig farming completely healed overnight, and different signs like this, then we would know we're dealing with a benevolent species, and then we could really be open and welcome. But then again, we would have to be cautious, because beings with that much power could give the impression that they're here to help when really they're not. So the verdict is out on all this. We just don't know which ones are benevolent, which ones are malevolent, and the degree to which they're going to continue interacting with our planet. But what would really help is if the United States military and police and government open it up to their staffs and say, look, this is something we really do have to consider. Because, you know, maybe the defense, the survival of our species could well be at stake. If you look at the history, you know, from, say, Ken Arnold's first sighting in '47, going back to the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, going back to the medieval manifestations of little saucers and UFOs, that painting of the Madonna that's very famous, in which it appears, up to now, there have been no mass murders by these beings. There's been no mass destruction of cities, but hundreds of thousands of people have been taken out of their lives, subjected to surgical experimentation, released back into the population, and are suffering trauma today for it. That is not good.
The idea, I mean, like in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the meeting on the dark side of the moon in Devil's Tower, Wyoming, I mean, it seems like the logical thing to do. I mean, we have a communication, a teletype message, we have a place, a location, and a time, and we isolate it from the public until we know it's safe. I mean, we check each other out. I mean, this seems like the most logical thing to do, you know, even rather than meeting on the White House lawn. I mean, this is the way we would like it to happen. But that doesn't seem to be the way it's really happening. I mean, these extraterrestrials don't seem to be so interested in doing things politically the way we do things on Earth. They're picking certain individuals to contact. They are zeroing in on those individuals. But now, I mean, there are so many sightings going on all over the planet. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, Iran, Turkey, Mexico, Venice, California, Sonora, California, Texas, Death Valley. I mean, the reports are coming in every other day now. It seems like we're heading towards an omega point. I mean, what is about to happen? I mean, is this all just a coincidence that more and more people have video cameras, or do you really think, you know, there's a major unprecedented communication that is about to happen between our extraterrestrial visitors and humanity? Or again, is it the video camera question? More camcorders?
There are definitely more video cameras out there, and definitely more sightings, and definitely more credible witnesses. You know, the biggest thing in ufology in the 60s was Herb Shermer, the Nebraska Highway Patrolman, who was at the Ashland Oil tank farm out there in Nebraska, and he writes in his diary, you know, saw flying saucer, and then under hypnosis, turned out that he was taken aboard and informed of their intentions. Barney and Betty Hill. I mean, these were the key cases. Shermer, Barney and Betty Hill, the Pascagoula incident, Travis Walton. Now there are hundreds of cases like this, and I think that because it's in the consciousness, because we have, you know, a poll saying basically half of the world believes and half doesn't, we're reaching a point where, as Stephen Bassett talks about his time clock, it's like the nuclear time clock that we had in the 50s before we blew the world, you know, before we blew the world up. The theory that once the hands got to midnight, that's when all the nuclear weapons in the world would be discharged. Well, we've stopped that nuclear clock, thankfully. But as far as the UFO clock, he says we're 1 minute to midnight now, meaning that in a minute to midnight, something really, really spectacular is going to happen. Now, whether that's a mass appearance, whether that is, you know, come over to the Yankee Stadium during a game, I think possibly the next, maybe even in the next 5 years, we're going to have occasions like the one I experienced in upstate New York in the mid-'80s when I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to my wife, they're calling me, I want to go outside, they want me to come outside and see. He said, who? Something outside wants me to come out and say, oh, just go back to bed. I went back to bed, but in the next day in the media, in newspapers, in radio, all over upstate New York and Ontario and Quebec and Vermont, people spoke about this urge they had to go out of their houses at 3 in the morning and look up into the sky. And 12,000 people shared this urge. And they went out and it was a big, big news story. And of course the Air Force said that a Chinese rocket had exploded over New York State. And what people saw was a massive, miles-high pink spiral in the sky above the Great Lakes. In Hull, Quebec, Canada, a few years afterwards, there was a story of several hundred people, almost 1,000 people in this community, Gatineau, north of Hull, Quebec, Canada, in the Quebec province, sharing this urge to come outside and look up into the sky, and they also saw an apparition. So there are going to be more of these mass sightings. And, the day that 1 million people in Idaho at a rock concert or something see it, that is when you're going to really get the conventional military and police sitting down to say, well, it's time to throw the Brookings Institution report out and lay it open to the people and let the people decide, what must be done in conference with our state leaders.
So perhaps you can tell us, you were head of the UFO project for 3 years and you've researched other cases since. What kind of abduction stories have you come across?
There are some common themes that run through these sorts of things. I mean, at basic level, you get somebody who claims to have seen a UFO, and then they'll have a period of so-called missing time. They'll perhaps be on a journey in a car, and they'll get home, an hour or two later than they should have done on, say, a regular journey, and they'll have no idea what happened in that missing period, other than perhaps a vague recollection of seeing a strange light in the sky. When they begin to think back about it, sometimes it comes out through people just remembering, sometimes maybe through dreams, they begin to suspect that something happened in that period of missing time. Something happened and their memory was wiped. And then you get into the whole business of regression hypnosis, which a lot of people use to probe this period of missing time. And that's when you get quite a standardized account. And that's quite interesting because it comes out from people who very often have little or no knowledge of the subject, and people who don't know each other, and yet a fairly similar narrative structure emerges. In other words, somebody is taken into a spaceship, they're placed on their back on some sort of table or raised platform. Very often people describe being paralysed. Very often lines of dialogue like "this won't hurt" or "we mean you no harm" will be heard.
And these are common themes that
they run through an awful lot of these accounts. And again, in terms of the description of the beings, again, there's a surprising amount of commonality. People describe entities which are essentially grey in colour, about 3.5 or 4 feet tall, with disproportionately large heads, quite spindly arms and legs, essentially humanoid, but the most striking feature is large, black, almond-shaped eyes.
Abduct me!
And Kepler has found 1,200 planet candidates so far. So there's roughly 2,000 candidate extrasolar planets. We're finding them everywhere. The universe is full of planets. So, if it's full of planets, this opens up an interesting idea. Maybe alien abduction, after all, was correct. Because when Bruno and Epicurus said about countless worlds, frankly, they had no data to support that assertion at all. It was an interesting concept, it was an interesting hypothesis, but no data. Now, we've lots of data suggesting lots of worlds. So, back in the 60s in particular, alien abductions were very commonplace. And I just wish I was a bit older so I could have participated more regularly in those alien abductions, but possibly for the same reasons that when I remember the first time I went with a couple of friends of mine lying on the beach in Marbella, and there were these very pretty girls come along with these vouchers for the nightclub, and they walked straight past us, I remember, and we were not happy on that, and we felt, why did you not abduct me? Bit of a stretch that, but you kind of get the idea. So maybe it was because we were white and lying on the beach that the aliens didn't come near us either, but let's imagine that there are others that they might be interested on. So we can ask some questions about alien abductions, and there's a point to this slide away, and it's almost the last slide. We can ask, where would they come from? Well, now at least we have an idea that there are possible destinations from which to come from. So nobody can say to you, if I say, I've been abducted, well, I don't do any funny voices. I've been abducted. Yep. Now, usually the conversation will probably progress from that, like, you know, what happened and so on, ordinarily, or... But let's imagine we're actually interested in this person. So we'd say to them, well, you know, we know there's lots of planets. How would they get here? Okay, well, we know that you can travel in spacecraft. We do it. It's slow, but it's doable. Okay, so you can say, well, there's no way to get there, to here. There is. You can do it. It takes time, but you can do it. So there's places to come from, and there's a mode of transport to get here. So now you go into the second sort of level of questions. Well, why would they come? Now you see, it's not clear why they would come, but you can't say there's no reason for them to come, because you don't know what they're thinking. So maybe they have a reason, whether we know it or not. So it's possible. You start to get into the, I believe you or I don't believe you. Why would they hide themselves? So we lose you off here, well, they really try to keep themselves hidden and all the rest. And for those of you who are Star Trek fans, you've got this Prime Directive as a concept. Who's a Star Trek fan? Who knows what the Prime Directive? Oh, I'd love to see. Prior to be a Star Trek fan. Although my dad goes on about why, when they accelerate, you don't end up at the back wall of the spacecraft with a tea all over you. He always says that. So I tell him it's a force field, Dad. Really stay with the technology. So why would they hide themselves? Well, I don't know why they hide themselves, but they might have a reason. So I can't rule that out. And then why would they abduct you? It might seem silly. For example, if you do have the technology to come some distance, probably it lacks a certain amount of credibility that they bother to abduct you, that they need to do that. But maybe they do. Maybe they're really smart physicists and really stupid biologists. So, they've come all this way, they found us, they thought, no idea what's going on, we'll take you in and have a look. Can't rule that out. But now we get into things that we can start to ask, which are then moving from sort of definite questions which are perfectly reasonable into, we can debate, into the questions, the data. How repeatable are the abductions? So, if you've been abducted, how many times? When did it happen? What were you doing at the time? What was the sensation? Ask the questions around the abductions. Are abductions ever observed by more than one? And you have to ask credible person, okay? So, two mates saying they were both abducted or whatever like that on many different occasions is one that's very much thrown into question. But you can ask a question like that. And then, a really important one. If you've been abducted, is there anything novel about what's happened to you that would suggest something that's beyond what, something innovative? We keep on using these words, innovation, entrepreneurship, and all the rest. Well, my guess is if you come all the way from Alpha to Zingo up here, that you're probably either innovative or entrepreneurial in your approach. And there'll be something new you can tell to us that we haven't thought about. But if we never find satisfactory answers to, for example, those questions, or as a final one, and these were just a couple of the sorts of questions, materials. We hear of crashed sites, lots of things falling down, all the rest. Absolutely indentations all over the place. I remember when I was young, I was born and raised in Dundalk in Dublin, and I remember the Irish UFO Research Association came out one time with Geiger counters, and they put them down on this field, and they said, yes, that's the 3 legs of the landing craft, and there's more radiation. Obviously, where the legs go down, there'd be more radiation, wouldn't there? Well, no, completely not obvious at all. In fact, I imagine that's where there wouldn't be any radiation if the legs are in the way. But I mean, obviously, the radiation as well. So, I think we should get something to talk about radiation, by the way. But the thing is that if there are these crashed spacecraft, you can reasonably ask, and Roswell is the key, sort of key example. Why don't we find sort of some sort of evidence? But you can actually break down the whole alien abductions, and Sagan makes a very interesting point about the novel information. He says that the thing about alien abductions that stands out in his mind is not how amazing it is. It's how unbelievably boring and unimaginative they are. It's just, oh, I was abducted and they stick things up here and they push things down. Well, there's nothing about it that suggests something you wouldn't imagine by sitting in a room or talking with others. And the other thing about alien abductions, by the way, which makes you skeptical in the true sense, if I can use the word the true sense, is that the predictions are always centered on current issues. You know, AIDS, if it's during the 80s, say, nuclear power during the 60s. But in the 60s, they didn't predict AIDS or whatever. So there's no suggestion that, well, we kind of went through this, or you need to worry about that new type of technology, or, you know, have you considered Facebook, for example? Nothing like that is actually provided. So it's almost kind of retrospective information. Whereas if you take the young slits experiment, it's providing you with forward-spective, if that's a word, probably isn't, but anyway, forwardly looking information. It's showing you something which is data which you don't yet understand, as distinct from talking about things that you do, but just talking about them in a different context. So if you go back to our skeptical list, if we have the situation with ghosts, here's the way I look on these things. And this is a completely personal view. I have no idea what happens to us when we die, okay? Because to me there's no data one way or another. I don't know what happens. I don't know if some of us tried to come back as shadowy figures to irritate our friends and neighbours and so on. But what's clear is that there is no credible, reproducible evidence that this goes on. And I think at some point, if there's no credible, reproducible evidence, just because it's possible, doesn't make it likely. But the one thing I will put, the caveat I will put in is, we have been fooled. Science still fools us. If there is something called a ghost, if there really is an afterlife, that's an enormous discovery. So what we should potentially do is we should look for credible mechanisms to test out these important hypotheses. And they're important even if only because people want to know, did something happen to my loved one? That's a very valid question to ask. And science can't answer that if the ultimate basis for ghosts is completely within their power. If they're outside of the laws of physics, for use a better term, then science, which relies on some knowledge of some laws and the applications of the scientific method, is going to get lost very quickly. It's hard to see that the majority of the claims around these have any basis at all in what they claim to have a basis in. It is absolutely possible that some people completely believe they've been abducted and it's a mental issue. If there really are people coming to us from another planet, that would be amazing. I would love to find that out. So it's not as if it's a closed-minded thing. I'd love somebody to go along. I'm not going to do it, but let somebody else do it. I didn't discover this either, you know. I mean, well, I wasn't even born. Obviously, so that was a hindrance already. But the thing was that I'm glad that we know that, and I'd love to know that alien abductions, I'd love to know that aliens exist. I think it'd be cool. I can't imagine a universe in which we're the only creatures. It just seems very, very difficult to imagine that. So this isn't impossible. But science and skepticism, which go hand in hand, haven't found any evidence for it. In fact, in a sense, the opposite. So, to conclude, in science, some phenomena are really difficult to explain. Some are difficult to understand, and some have no complete explanation. So, should we be skeptical? Well, of course we should. But not suspiciously so if the phenomenon is testable to a greater or lesser degree. So you can start off with a test that indicates something, and you need to do more testing and better testing. But as long as you're not just suspicious of everything. In other words, science requires you to be skeptical, but to think of tests that can check out whether you are right to hold that skeptical viewpoint. And I want to make the point, I've already made it, but that some of our most basic scientific tenets have still not yielded to inquiry and remain a puzzle. It's part of the fascination of science, but I'm not even talking about things about exactly why certain types of cancers grow. I'm talking about things that are even much more fundamental like that, the very fabric of the universe in which we which we live. We really don't have a good understanding of that. I was at a talk that a cosmologist gave a number of years ago, and he talked about cosmological theory and the fact that the mathematics suggests that we have maybe an infinite number of universes. And he was saying, so we're in one of those infinite number of universes. And he said he went home and he realized that if you have an infinite number of universes, then there's an infinite number of things going on an infinite number of times all the time. And then he thought, so that means that no matter how bad a presentation I make here tonight, in some universe I'm getting a standing ovation right now. So what if I have one bad universe, somewhere else you guys think I'm brilliant? And I just thought that was a really, it made me cheered me up no end, I have to say, and it might do so tonight as well. But the thing is that that's complete speculation, and you will hear a lot of talk about multiple universes and so on. There is not a shred of evidence for multiple universes. None. Zero. It's all mathematical at this point. It may turn out to be the case, but we have no observational evidence. I wish there was, or I wish we had a way of testing for other ones, but we don't have that at the moment. So, an almost final thought, which is one that I like. Again, I may have shown some of you this before. The most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not "Eureka, I found it," but that's funny. And in fact, that's exactly the way most of the things that are funny about that fundamental about the universe come about. It's realizing that something doesn't quite fit. And when things don't quite fit, it's often not that you can simply squeeze them together. It's often you have to unravel the whole lot. And this wave particle duality that I referred to was exactly that. Newtonian physics is simply incapable of explaining what some others saw tonight independently, the diffraction of light. Newtonian mechanics cannot explain that. Even our new quantum physics has a bit of difficulty with that. So the final thought, X-rays are a hoax. And this was said by our old friend, Lord Kelvin, who was at times a noted skeptic and at other times just a little bit mad. So that's all I have to say on my take on a bit of skepticism. Thank you very much for listening.